Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee to order. Just a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during our committee meetings. Please note that quorum is present, so we'll go through our roll call. If I can just get you to turn on your microphones to acknowledge that you're present as I go through the roll call name. Councillor Kretsch?
I'm here.
Karen Burke?
Present.
Graham Carroll?
Present.
Andrew Douglas?
Present.
Lynn Lundstead?
Present.
Andy McLaren?
Present.
Stefan Spalnick?
Present.
Thank you, everyone. Mr. Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda today?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are 2 changes to the agenda. Under item 8, staff presentations, item 8.4, recommendation to designate 134 Cannon Street East, Hamilton, former Cannon Knitting Mill, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, PED 24136, Ward 2 has been withdrawn. As well, we have an added consent item, item 9.1E, Heritage Permit Application HP 2024-025, exterior repairs at 3436 Hess Street South in Hamilton, Ward 2. Those are the changes.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I see Karen and Lynn.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Do we have any declarations of interest today? Seeing none, we'll move on to our approval of minutes of the previous meeting. We have before us the meeting notes from August 19th, 2024. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I see Stefan and Andy.
And before we move to vote, is there any questions or comments in regards to those meeting notes? If not, may I have, as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Under staff presentations, we'll begin with item 8.1, was the recommendation to designate 265 Mill Street South, Flamborough, Braeburn, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, PED 24169, Ward 15. We have Scott Dickinson, Cultural Heritage Planning Technician, here to make his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Scott Dickinson, Cultural Heritage Planning Technician, and this is Agenda Item 8.1, Report PED 24169, the recommendation to designate 265 Mill Street South, Flamborough, otherwise known as Braeburn, or the Cummer House. Come on. There we go. This property is located on the northeastern corner of the intersection of Mill Street South and Mountain Brow Road in the former township of East Flamborough in the village of Waterdown in the city of Hamilton. In November of 2019, this property was listed on the Municipal Heritage Register, and in March of 2021, the owner applied for a zoning bylaw amendment application to permit the adaptive reuse of the existing single detached dwelling and the accessory structure to relocate the existing Waterdown Montessori School to the subject lands. In April of 2022, Council added this to staff's designation work plan as a low priority and directed staff to designate this property when construction completed. And following that, in August of 2022, the zoning amendment application went into effect. In March of 2023, this property was prioritized for designation by January 1st, 2025. To date, staff have received no indication that the proposed redevelopment of the subject property is still ongoing, and as such are moving forward with the designation at this time. Staff recommend designation of this property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as it meets 6 of the 9 criteria laid out under Ontario Regulation 9-06. This property has design and physical value. It is comprised of a 2-story stone dwelling, originally constructed circa 1846, with additions made in the 1860s and in the early and mid-20th century. Though modified, the original portion of the stone structure is a representative example of the neoclassical style of architecture as applied to a private dwelling. The features typical of this style include the symmetrical three-bay front elevation, the hip roof with wooden cornice and a projecting eaves, the Venetian window in the second story with the wooden surround with pilasters and brackets supporting a molded cornice, the window openings with stone voussoirs, 6/6 hung wooden windows, and tooled stone lug sills, and the central entrance with a paneled door flanked by sidelights and a wooden surround with pilasters and brackets supporting a molded cornice. This property also displays a high degree of craftsmanship, as demonstrated by the wooden surround on the second-story Venetian window and the paneled front door with sidelights and molded cornice supported by pilasters and carved brackets. This property also has a great deal of historical and associative value. It is associated with several prominent Watertownians who were former owners. This stone dwelling was originally built for John Cummer, who was the son of loyalist and miller Jacob Cummer. Jacob, John's father, settled in what is now the Toronto neighborhood of Willowdale, where his son became both a miller and a millwright, constructing a variety of mills both in York County, which included several mills for his father's milling complex in what is now known as the Toronto neighborhood of Willowdale. John, looking to expand his business operations, purchased land along with an existing grist mill and sawmill in Smoky Hollow in 1845. He sent his son, Abram Lockman Cummer, who was then just 19, to Smoky Hollow to supervise the construction of the subject property, a house for John and his family, and which would overlook the new mills in Smoky Hollow. John Cummer, at this point looking to retire from business, moved into this new house and placed his older son, Jacob, named after his grandfather, in charge of the mills in Toronto, and placed Abram, who mostly went by his middle name of Lockman, so we'll call him Lockman, in charge of these newly purchased enterprises in Waterdown. In addition to operating the Cummer family mills, Lockman also had interests in several other local grist and sawmills. He was also responsible for the construction of the millworkers' cottages at 40 to 42 Mill Street South, which is now known as the Cummer Stone Row. And in partnership with William Gill, he established the Cummer, Gill and Company, which both operated another flour mill and also owned an iron foundry where they produced steam engines and a wide range of machinery for a wide range of mills. Following the death of his father, John, in 1868 and his mother, Sarah, in 1870, the subject property was sold to William Pierce Howland, who was one of the wealthiest millers in Canada. Howland was already well known to the Cummer family, having taken a mortgage on this property in 1857 when Cummer, Gill and Company failed in the wake of the financial crisis, now known to us as the Panic of 1857. Howland also ended up purchasing the Cummer's grist mills in Smoky Hollow, as well as the Cummer Stone Row in 1871. So he came and purchased everything they had built. William Pierce Howland was engaged in a very wide range of business ventures. He owned multiple mills and general stores in the Toronto area and had interests in wholesaling, lumbering, insurance, and banking. His large resources allowed him to expand the Cummer's small mill operation until it became one of the largest and most important at the head of the lake. The Waterdown Flouring Mill, also known as the Torrid Zone Mill, is pictured on this slide. It was capable of producing 150 barrels of flour each day. Unsurprisingly, next to this mill building, Howland constructed a barrel factory to produce those 150 barrels every day. And this mill proved to be quite a success and was in operation until it was destroyed by a fire in 1910. Howland, who was American-born, became a naturalized Canadian in 1841 and was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Canada in 1857. A powerful and influential politician, Howland was appointed on several occasions as a delegate to England to speak to Canadian interests. As one of the 16 delegates to the London Conference of 1866, William Pierce Howland is considered today to be the only American-born father of Confederation. He would also serve as Lieutenant Governor of Ontario between 1868 and 1871. And this property was used by Howland and his family as a summer home before being sold in 1900. At which point, we're not finished yet, at which point it was purchased by Robert Livingston Innes, who is a prominent Hamilton industrialist, being heavily involved in Canada's canning industry. He was president of the Dominion Canners Limited conglomerate, which controlled 80% of Canada's canned foods and vegetables. And he was also the president of Zimmerknit, the well-known Hamilton textile company. Robert Livingston Innes would sell this property to Francis Farwell, who is the one who gave this property the name of Brabourne. Farwell was one of the founders of the Canadian Coach Lines and was the first chairperson of Hamilton's original Transit Commission. He and his wife commissioned famed Canadian landscape architects Laurie and Howard Dunnington Grubb to redesign the grounds of the property in the 1940s. Dunnington Grubb's plans, which you can also see on this slide, both an overhead view and an isometric view, called for multiple stone terraces, hedge walls, a large perennial garden, and separate service and entrance courtyards for arriving vehicles. Unfortunately, little of this design survives today. Now, this property also has a great deal of contextual value. Pardon me, I think I went a little too, yes, pardon me, we're not there yet. We're still in the historical associative. There's a lot going on with this one. This property has the potential to contribute to an understanding of Waterdown as a 19th century industrial community. The owners of the subject property were heavily involved in the development of Waterdown's mills and factories, which were central to Waterdown's historic growth as a community. Now, this property also has contextual value. It is important in defining the historic former industrial character of the surrounding area. Though the long-vanished mills and workshops of Smoky Hollow have left very few traces, the subject property, the mill owner's house, remains a short walk from those former mill sites, now the site of Smoky Hollow Park, as a physical reminder of Waterdown's industrial past. And you can see in this early 20th century photograph in the upper left-hand corner, the subject property, the White House, overlooking the mills that Howland owned in Smoky Hollow itself. This property is visually, historically, and physically linked to the surrounding area. Still on its original location, close to the former mill sites of Smoky Hollow, this house allowed the mill owners to keep a close eye on their business while still enjoying some separation from the noise and smoke of industry. These foregoing criteria are summarized here in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest. The full version of this statement is found in Appendix B of Report PED 24-169. Also in that report is this description of heritage attributes. This list of attributes will inform the writing of a heritage bylaw if this recommendation is passed by council, and it includes all elevations and roof line of this two-story stone structure, including its brick chimney, hip roof with projecting eaves and molded cornice, symmetrical three-bay front elevation, rough-cut rubble stone walls, Venetian window in the second story, 6/6 hung windows with working shutters, the paneled front door with side lights and wooden transom, and its stone foundation. The one-story sunroom side wing to the west of the original portion of the house has attributes including its flat roof, its 6/9 hung wood windows, and its wooden shingle siding. As well, the front elevation of the stone first-story side wing to the east, which is the 1860s edition, including its 6/6 hung wood windows with stone voussoirs and lug sills. The interior features of the center hallway of the first and second floor, including the wooden baseboards and the central quarter-sawn American white oak staircase, as well as the contextual attributes of this property, including its location on raised topography at the top of Mill Street South, which overlooks Smoky Hollow today, and its deep setback from Mountain Brow Road with lawns sweeping down to the public right-of-way. Staff recommend that the city clerk be directed to give notice of council's intention to designate this property as a property of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Of course, we open it. Any questions?
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any questions for the presentation? Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Okay, through the chair. Thanks, Scott, for that presentation. Very good presentation. Just a question regarding, first of all, personally, I'm thrilled that this property is now being considered for designation. I wasn't aware that process is going through. I drive by this property every day. But I do have, we were at a estate sale, if you want to call it, 7 to 10 years ago. And it was being sold off by the estate to potential owner. I won't get into what they were going to do. But since then, it's been changed ownership several times for what I've heard, anywhere from condo units to like low condo units and the school. So currently, right now, these are beautiful pictures that were taken at the beginning of the presentation. And this is kind of the condition it was during the estate sale. But currently, it looks like a badly neglected, abandoned building. All the windows are boarded up with plywood and what have you. I'm just curious, a question is the current condition of the building, has that been looked into to see if it is being looked after, at least protected, before all this designation approval is considered? I could ask that question through staff.
Through the chair to Andy, so Alyssa Golden here, Cultural Heritage Program Lead. So yes, a lot of the photographs that you were seeing in Scott's presentation that are included in the staff report as well are from when staff were able to actually go on site with the owner early in their redevelopment process a number of years ago. Staff have conducted an updated site visit, but from the public right-of-way in terms of confirming the status of these features. And in terms of the scope of what's included in the recommendations for designation, it also takes into consideration the scope of the proposal for the adaptive reuse and redevelopment of the site and the heritage impact assessment that was prepared by the consultant for the owner in terms of the identification of specific features that are proposed to be retained through that process. So that has all been taken into consideration in terms of the recommendation in front of you today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Alyssa. That's all I have. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the presentation? Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair. I seem to recall in this committee several years ago that we saw the proposals to put it into a Montessori school. And I was under the impression that all of the permits and everything had gone through and everything was fine, but nothing has happened that is evident on the property in several years. Do you know why?
Through the chair, so as discussed in the staff report, the zoning amendment application was approved. That is in place. There are some requirements and holdings related to that, as far as I understand, have not been cleared. And at this point, there are no building permits for work to commence. So that's part of why, as discussed in the staff report, with the council direction to designate by the end of this year, why this is being brought forward and why the scope of what we're proposing for designation aligns with the original redevelopment proposal as well, to make sure it's not impeding that from moving forward when it's able to. And just an additional update, since the time of writing this report, we have been able to get in touch, at least via email, with the owner and have been playing a bit of phone and email tag in terms of having some additional follow-ups, but they have acknowledged that we are bringing this report forward today.
Thanks, Alyssa. Any other questions in regards to the presentation itself? If not, go ahead, Lynn.
Sorry, it's just a comment. That was great report, Scott. And Sir William Pierce Howland's son, Adam, was also a mayor of Toronto.
A lot of very important people involved. There's a lot of very important people involved in that property.
Actually, through the chair, to Lynn's comment, 2 of Howland's sons were mayor of Toronto. Even more important.
What else can we figure out? I just keep bettering it. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation?
I see Lynn and Graham.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed to receiving the presentation? Seeing none, that item is carried, and we move on to the report. We now have the report before us. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the recommendations on the floor?
I see Andrew and Lynn.
And again, those recommendations are, as Scott had provided on the slide. Are there any questions in regards to the report itself or those recommendations? If not, we'll move to vote. As we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Thank you. Item 8.2 is our recommendation to designate 24 Blake Street in Hamilton, East Court Carriage House under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, PED 24171 and Word 3. We have Marissa Barris, Cultural Heritage Planning Technician, is here to give her presentation.
Hello. I am Marissa Barris, Cultural Heritage Planning Technician, presenting on staff's recommendation to designate 24 Blake Street's East Court Carriage House. The property at 24 Blake is comprised of two buildings, a 2.5-story circa 1910 residential building and a circa 1875 carriage house to the rear of the property, fronting onto a public laneway. It's important to note that staff's recommendation has not identified the 20th century residential building as an asset for protection at this time, and are instead focusing the designation on the circa 1875 carriage house highlighted on these maps. So the subject property was first surveyed for potential heritage interest in 2019 by the HMHC Inventory and Research Working Group, and in 2020 it was listed on the Heritage Municipal Register, and the carriage house was added to staff's designation work plan. In 2022, the property was identified as a high priority for review for designation by January 1st, 2025. And on May 8th, 2024, staff received an inquiry from the property owner looking for more information on their property's heritage status. In subsequent phone and email conversations with the owner, they expressed interest in having their property designated, and staff conducted a site visit on June 3rd, 2024, at which time the owner expressed their continued interest in the designation of the property, and on August 9th, 2024, staff advised the owner of the recommendation to designate their property. Here you can see a summary of the staff evaluation, which determined that the property through the carriage house meets 5 of the 9 criteria for designation, which I'll talk about more. So the carriage house has physical value as a representative and unique example of a 19th century brick outbuilding. The 1.5-story outbuilding was designed to match the Second Empire style and ornate detailing of the East Court estate, which was an elaborate mansion that fronted onto Main, which the carriage house originally served. And I'll touch more on that a little bit later in the presentation. Representative features of the building include its mansard roof with half-round dormers and segmentally arched window and door openings with brick voussoirs and cast iron ornaments. You can see some of the cast iron ornaments here. The use of cast iron ornamentation over window and door opening keystones and at the proximal ends of their decorative arches is also considered to be rare and to display a high degree of craftsmanship. By the late 1880s, cast iron had been largely replaced by galvanized iron, a form of sheet metal, which became very popular for fabricating ornate cornices and window surrounds, with cast iron being relegated to storefronts for both structural and ornamental function. Historic mapping and differences in the brickwork suggest that the building has undergone modifications from its original design, with garage doors installed on the south and east elevations and an additional large opening to the west elevation, which has truncated 2 of the original window and door openings. You can see that truncation in this image. The property also meets 2 historical and associative criteria, believed to have been originally built circa 1875 as part of the East Court estate for Edward Mitchell, who was a local businessman that worked with the Bank of Commerce. The original estate spanned the entirety of the block on which 24 Blake sits before it was subdivided over time. While the architect for the building is unknown, and while the original East Court estate has been demolished, it was demolished in the 1970s, it was built at the same time as the neighboring property at 7 Blake, which is now known as the Adelaide House, in a very similar style. These monumental estates were, at the time of their construction, elaborate properties that showcased the wealth of their original owners, which outbuildings like the carriage house that remains today speak to. In 1893, the Hoodless family became the second owners of the property when it was purchased by Joseph and his son John Hoodless of J. Hoodless and Son, a Hamilton-based furniture manufacturing business. By 1894, Joseph, John, and John's family, including his wife, Adelaide Hoodless, who was born Hunter originally, and their children moved onto the property. While J. Hoodless and Son left their mark in Hamilton's history, it was Adelaide who actually emerged as an important and high-profile political player during their time at East Court. Adelaide was a champion for Canadian women's education and participated in the founding of Hamilton's YWCA chapter in 1889, becoming its second president in 1890, opening the School of Domestic Science, which was the very first of its kind, a few years later in 1894. Drawing on the success in 1900, she also played a central role in establishing the Ontario Normal School of Domestic Science and Art in Hamilton. Beyond Hamilton, Adelaide was also important at national and provincial levels, participating in international and national women's conferences and playing an instrumental role in the forming of YWCA Canada as well in 1895. The Women's Institute in 1897 with Erlyn Lee in Stony Creek's Erlyn Lee House, and presiding over the creation of the Macdonald Institute of Home Economics in Guelph in 1903, which influenced the Ontario governments to adopt domestic science into public education in 1897. She also wrote the very first domestic science textbook in Canada in 1898. She did a lot of stuff. As an important and high-profile figure in women's organizing, East Court became a frequented gathering place for important discussions and formal meetings for the organizations and individuals affiliated with Adelaide. Despite her advocacy for women's education and contribution to women's organizing, it's also worth noting that Adelaide supported more conservative movements to integrate women into Canadian politics and was opposed to radical movements like women's suffrage, which was the right to vote and hold political office. Following Adelaide's death in 1910, the Hoodless family vacated East Court, at which point the carriage house was subdivided and the laneway that it currently is on was plotted to circumvent the carriage house. The empty mansion was converted into apartments by 1914, and it fell into disrepair by 1969, was eventually demolished for redevelopment into a school which opened in 1972. The carriage house was spared demolition because of this subdivision and its separation from the original estate. As the last remaining building of the original East Court estate, the property stands as a testament to the design and detail of the historically significant property and has the potential to yield information that contributes to an understanding of Adelaide Hoodless, late 19th and early 20th century women's movements and organizing, and the early urban development of the Blakely neighborhood. So the carriage house's well-hidden location behind the early 20th century dwelling at 24 Blake Street means that the property is important in supporting, but not necessarily defining, the character of the area. It serves as a tangible reminder of the early history of the Blakely neighborhood's development as one of a series of substantial estates, including 7 Blake Street, which I mentioned earlier. Broadly, this building is also an important commemorative feature of Adelaide's impact on the local community, given that the property at 7 Blake is now called Adelaide's House after her, and given the construction of the nearby Adelaide Hoodless Elementary School at 71 Maplewood Avenue, which was built shortly following her death. The carriage house has also played an important role in shaping local urban development by directly influencing the development of the public laneway to accommodate the building. So here you can see a short summary of all of the criteria for your reference, and a full version of the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest is available in Appendix B of the staff report. Here we have a summary list of the heritage features identified to be included in the designation. Again, this list can be found in Appendix B of the staff report. And then here we have a summary of staff's recommendation. for staff's recommendation, which can, again, be found in Report PED 24-171. Questions?
Thanks, Marissa, that was great. Do we have any questions in regards to the presentation? Go ahead, Graham.
Or just a comment. Thank you once again for a great presentation. It's good to see these buildings get done. It's excellent to see the property owners supporting designation of their buildings. And looking back at the change since that was first brought to us as members of the Inventory Research Working Group to what it is now, it's in a lot better shape than it was, that's for sure. And a final mention, just a reminder, this property was brought to our attention by the former friend of ours, Jim Charlton, before he passed away.
Thank you for that reminder, Graham. That is true. I know that was a property that he really did want to make sure was protected. Did we have any other questions? Seeing none, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation?
I see Stefan and Karen.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed to receiving? Seeing none, that item is carried, and we'll move on to the report. We now have before us the report. May I have a mover and a seconder to put forward the report recommendations?
See Graham and Andrew.
So those recommendations are as Marissa had shown on the screen. Is there any questions in regards to the report itself or those recommendations? Seeing none, as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. And we move on to item 8.3. This is a recommendation to designate 311 Wilson Street East in Ancaster, Orton House, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, PED 24170, Ward 12. Scott's back to give us another presentation on this property.
Good afternoon once again. For those of you just tuning in, this is Scott Dickinson, Cultural Heritage Planning Technician, and this is Agenda Item 8.3, Report PED 24107, the recommendation to designate 311 Wilson Street East, Ancaster, known as the Orton House. This property is located on the southwestern corner of the intersection of Wilson Street East and Sulphur Springs Road in the center of Ancaster within the city of Hamilton. This property was first surveyed for heritage interest in the 1970s by the Ancaster LAC, and in 2020 it was listed on the Municipal Heritage Register and added to staff's designation work plan. In March of 2023, it was reprioritized for designation by January 1st, 2025. Staff recommend designation for this property as it meets 6 of the 9 criteria laid out under Ontario Regulation 9-06. This property has design and physical value. This 2-story brick building is believed to have been constructed as a 1-story building circa 1850 and was heavily modified and expanded sometime before 1882. This property is a unique example of a former vernacular dwelling influenced by the Italianate style of architecture. The features that define this building as an example of the Italianate style include its truncated hip roof with a hip roof central belvedere, the projecting eaves with ornate paired brackets, and on the front elevation, the round-headed window with stone hood. The unique features of this property are the modifications undertaken to the original single-story structure to convert it into a 2-story Italianate dwelling. The evidence of these modifications includes the differing brick bonding between the different parts of the structure. On the front elevation, the main story is in a Flemish bond, while the upper story is in a stretcher bond. Along the northern elevation, pictured here, part of the front of the property, the first story, is also in a common bond, while the second story on the front of the property, as well as the rear addition, are in a stretcher bond. Besides the differing brick bonding, there is a marked contrast in the placement and sizing of windows between the main and the upper story, as well as the 1.5-story office entrance, which projects from the northern exterior, which you can just see the top of also in this photograph. I should note that there is also on the property a detached three-car garage built in 1997. This is not considered to be of cultural heritage value or interest. This property also displays a high degree of craftsmanship, as demonstrated through the turned and carved wooden brackets of the main body of the house and on the belvedere on top of the roof, the Flemish bond brickwork and stretcher bond brickwork on the frontage of the property, as well as the decorative belvedere, which helps assert the prominence of this property in the center of Ancaster. This property has historical value due to its direct associations with several prominent Ancastrians. Again, it is not quite clear when the original single-story portion of this building was constructed, though it was the home in the 1850s of George Burns, a shoemaker. Based on available evidence, the additions to this property took place sometime between 1869 and 1882, most likely in the early 1870s, when the property was either owned by Thomas McMurray, a lawyer, but more likely when Dr. Henry Orton, pictured here, owned the house through the 1870s. Now, Dr. Orton, whether or not he modified the house himself, did occupy this house for a fair number of years. Its exterior office entrance on the side made it quite convenient as the home of a country doctor, and he was very well known through the community of Ancaster for his widespread practice. His sudden accidental death in 1882 brought out an outpouring of grief in the community. Many parents named their children Orton in remembrance of him, and of course he is still commemorated today in a stained glass window in St. John's Anglican Church, which is of course just a few steps down the road from the subject property. After Dr. Orton's death, the property was rented to a succession of other local doctors, including Dr. George Devy Farmer, a member of the locally prominent Farmer family, and who is remembered today as the owner of the first automobile in Ancaster, but probably he's more remembered for his role as the commander of the 5th Canadian Field Ambulance during the First World War. After Dr. Farmer, the property was later owned by Charles Stewart, who is both the president of the local bank branch and the principal of Ancaster School, and Charles Renke, long-serving township clerk. This property also has contextual value. It is important in defining the character of the surrounding area. It reinforces the immediate streetscape as being part of a 19th century village, while providing a contrast to the smaller cottages nearby. This large two-story building set back from the road, just across the street from the old Township Hall, is in a prominent location and attracted important local figures and occupants to what was then the center of Ancaster. This property is functionally, visually, and historically linked to its surroundings. Its corner lot location ties into its historical function as a home for professionals, with a formal entrance facing Wilson Street and the side office entrance facing Sulphur Springs Road. It occupies a prominent location near the center of the Ancaster Village core, surrounded by other 19th century buildings along the historic transportation corridor of Wilson Street East. And of course, this property, again, located on a prominent corner lot in the center of the village core and well known enough to be referred to locally as the Orton House, and having been featured on various historical walking tours, is considered to be a local landmark. These foregoing criteria are summarized here. The full version of the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest can be found in Appendix B of the attached report. Also in Appendix B is this description of heritage attributes, which will inform the writing of a designation bylaw if this recommendation is passed by council. And these heritage attributes include all elevations and roof line of this two-story brick building, including its truncated hip roof with central belvedere and wide projecting eaves with paired ornate brackets, the front gabled dormer and oculus window, which may remain intact behind the contemporary front covered portico, the 3-bay front elevation, including its Flemish bond brickwork and the round-headed window on the second story with a stone hood, the flat-headed and segmentedly arched window openings in the first and second stories, respectively, the contrasting brickwork between the first and second stories and the front and rear of the building, the 2-story rear brick wing with its gable roof and paired wooden brackets, its segmentally arched window openings, and the projecting one-story office entrance on the northern elevation, as well as its stone foundation. Key contextual attributes of this property include its location at the corner of Wilson Street East and Sulphur Springs Road with a moderate setback from the public right-of-way, and its distinctive features, including its belvedere and projecting side entrances. Pardon me, side entrance is only the one. Whoops, skip the slide. There we go. Staff recommend that the city clerk be directed to give notice of council's intention to designate this property as a property of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any questions in regards to the presentation or comments? Nope, seeing none. So may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation?
I see Lynn and Karen.
And is there anyone opposed as we move to vote? Seeing none, that item is carried, and we move on to the report. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the report recommendations on the floor? And again,
see.
those are, oh, God, sorry.
I see Andrew and Andy.
And again, those are the recommendations that were shown on the slide. Are there any questions in regards to the report or the recommendations before us? Seeing none, we'll move on to voting. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Thank you to both Scott and Marissa for those reports and presentation, and to the staff team for all the work. That's 3 more designations that we've been able to see, so that's great work. Thank you so much. We're now moving on to our consent items. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the consent items on the floor? We have before us 9.1, which is our delegated approvals for heritage permit applications. 9.2 is our policy and design working group meeting notes from July 8th. And 9.3, which is our heritage permit review subcommittee minutes from August 20th.
I see Lynn and Andy.
Is there any questions or any comments in regards to any of those items on consent items? Seeing none, we'll move to vote. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Our next item is item 10.1, which under discussion items, it's the Provincial Planning Statement 2024 and its Cultural Heritage Resource Policies, which is PED 23113A, citywide. Alyssa, would you?
Let's get a mover and seconder first to put it on the floor.
To put this on the floor, can we have a mover and a seconder?
I see Lynn and Graham.
Okay. And Alyssa, if you can provide a brief summary.
Yes, through the chair, just as an update, so this is an information report. As folks would recall, staff had provided an information report when these proposed changes to provincial policy had first been introduced. We're now in a position of these will be coming to effect on October 20th of this year. So this report just outlines the changes from what was originally proposed to these amendments to what will come into effect next month. And staff provides some information in terms of the original comments we had provided and concerns raised in terms of the proposed changes and its impact on cultural heritage. And thankfully, in this case, there have been some amendments to what was originally proposed, and there's now some reintroduction of language that staff had flagged that had been removed in the original draft. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that folks might have about the report.
Thank you, Alyssa. Are there any questions or any comments for this item? No discussion? No? Okay, that's great. If there's no questions, we'll move to vote. Is there anyone opposed to receiving? Seeing none, that item is carried. Item 13.1 is our buildings and landscapes. So as we go through, we'll start our speakers list for anyone that has updates. Would anyone like to propose any additions or retractions from the list? No? Okay. So if we could start a speakers list of anyone that would like to provide reports. I've got Lynn, Stefan, Karen, okay. Graham. Okay. So we'll start with Lynn.
Okay. This is in regards to the buildings and landscapes yellow. Item B7, 62 6th Concession East, the Hewick House. This property is heavily treed, and it's very difficult to see anything from the road other than the trees. But as luck would have it, the previous owner of this building came into the archives this week and was able to fill me in on a lot of information. Her husband and her father-in-law, Hewicks, worked for Mr. Lambier, whose father was the original builder of this house. When they purchased it, it was in very poor condition. It was a stucco house, and the stucco was coming off, and the decorative barge board, which was on all of the gables, was rotten and disintegrated and had not been repaired. The Hewicks added a tin roof. They added vinyl siding to it, and they planted extensive gardens. The inside, the basement was a dirt floor because it was used to store potatoes because it was a potato farm. And they did some work and added a large addition to the back. They sold it in 2019 due to ill health. The current owners wanted to destroy the house and build a larger house further back on the property, which they were not allowed to do because the Grindstone Creek goes through here and it is under the Halton Conservation Authority. When COVID happened, the owners left the country. It has been vacant for 4 years. They totally gutted it before they left. The property go to the next picture there. The grass is being cut by the neighbor across the street because he couldn't stand it. But everything else is totally overgrown, and when I was able to, because I know that nobody lives there now, I went in the driveway, and the vegetation around that front porch and the front of the building, it's just invading everything. So I'm not sure where we go from here. I don't know that the house, it is on the inventory, but I'm not sure how much heritage value it has, given it has been modified. 60 acres of the property is being farmed by another neighbor, and he pays rent. But the specific area around the house is just totally overgrown.
Through the chair to Lynn, so thank you for flagging this. I'm not familiar with the status of this property, so staff can take a look at where things are at and determine also, based on what you're describing, if it is a vacant property, we can contact our colleagues in municipal law enforcement to determine if this should be registered vacant and proactively monitored through that process. So I can connect with Matt here to get the information that you had provided in those images, and we can forward those along to our colleagues in municipal law enforcement.
Yeah, thank you. It's my understanding that the owners live in Dubai. And just as an aside, the property is haunted. Mr. Lambier was killed by lightning. And several people have reported seeing his ghost both in the now swamp in the back of the property and the barn.
It's part of its property's value and heritage. Thank you for that report, Lynn. That's great. Any other properties that you want to know? Okay. Stefan, you're next.
So it's red, number 9, 80 to 92 Barton Street East, former Panorams. The north side of the building that runs along the sidewalk has been devastated by graffiti. And also on the west side, you can somehow gain access to the second story. It's covered in graffiti, and several pieces of boarding over the windows have been removed. So I'm not sure if people are accessing that at night or what's going on, but it should be looked into. It's a total mess right now. That's all.
Just to clarify, Stefan, that was building, so red, number 9, so that was the Hannerhan property? 80
that's
to
the
92?
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through the chair, Stefan, thank you for that update. I know that there was also a previous concern about the window that was reported to municipal law enforcement. And just as a reminder for folks, in addition to obviously updates here at Heritage Committee, if there are immediate concerns in terms of violations of existing bylaws, property standards, that those can also be reported directly through the online complaint form on the city's website. And I'd be happy to send that out, just in terms of getting more prompt responses instead of waiting for maybe these meetings to discuss the issues.
So thank you, Stefan. Was there any other properties that you wanted to provide update on? No, okay. Karen, you're next.
Thank you. I have one property report on, which is in the, let's see, A, endangered buildings and landscapes, the red topic. 216 Hat Street, which is number 5 on the list here, and it's on the inventory. It is currently up for sale and/or lease. And if you look at the MLS listing, what they actually have is their main photograph is a picture of if it were completely demolished and rebuilt as 2 new buildings. And then after that, it's all pictures of the current house. So if you want to say that's at risk, it looks like it to me. That's certainly how they're selling it. So that's all I had to say. Thank you. Just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
Through the chair to Karen, yes, I'm just taking a quick look. It does look as though there was a heritage impact assessment a couple of years ago as a part of a previous severance, but I'm not sure of the status of whether that severance went through or not. So I will take a look at that and I can send along those details afterwards.
Thank you, Karen. And Graham, you're next on the list.
Hey, I'm sure everyone's read in the paper about Century Manor is going to be hopefully redone by Indwell and supportive housing as part of the development that seniors residents in behind. To me, that's really hopeful, good news finally for a building that's been abused and neglected for the last 30, 40 years. Hopefully that one comes full circle now and gets to lives the building again. And I'm not sure if we want on my properties or not, but this is Ackmar. The Friends of Ackmar held their AGM last week, had their votes for officers, and I added as a director for the Friends of Ackmar, along with Rob Hamilton, 2 of the new ones. Diane Dent, still chair. Bob Gill is another member, and I forget the secretary's name.
Thank you, Graham, and congratulations on getting that appointment. Did you have any other updates? Just those? Okay, that's great. Any other members have anything they'd like to add? If not, may I have a motion to receive as we've moved to vote? Is there any, actually we need to vote for a seconder to receive.
I see Stefan and Andy.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Do we have any other business or items anyone would like to bring forward? Any staff updates? Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
Through the chair, just want to formally welcome, we have a new Heritage Co-op student this term, Miriam Hamden, who just started with us at the start of September, and she'll be with us until the end of December. So really grateful to continue to have that support to our team, and I'm sure you folks, some of you would have already met her at some of the work groups and committees, so yeah, just a formal welcome.
Welcome, and I know how important it is to have the students helping, so that's fantastic. If there's no other updates, we get to move to adjournment. Do we have a mover and a seconder for adjournment?
I see Karen and Andrew.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed to adjourning? Seeing none, that item is carried. Thank you, everyone, and our next meeting is scheduled for October 25th at noon. All right. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the next couple of weeks, and we'll see you soon.